Hello, friends. Before we get into this episode, I do want to acknowledge that today is Memorial Day of 2017. A very exciting day for a lot of people. It's kind of the start of summer. People are getting their flip-flops out and their tank tops and going swimming and cooking out and all that fun stuff. But I do want to, just acknowledge that this day is to remember those that have served the country that have since passed away, which I know is definitely a large bit of what we do. I know many of us have worked with several veterans that have passed away from this earth and have had a big impact on us and some of the stories that they've shared and just the sacrifice that they've given, for our country. So I do not want to take that lightly and acknowledge them before we jump into this episode. The Senior Rehab Podcast is sponsored by Great Seminars and Books. If you need high-quality geriatric con ed that's worth your time and money, check out Great. Owned by the living legend Carol Lewis, Great offers courses and products created by recognized leaders in geriatrics. Learn the most effective techniques for diagnosing and treating your patients. Just go to seniorrehabproject.com/great and get $25 off by using the code SRP25. The show is also sponsored by you, the listener. Go to seniorrehabproject.com/join to find out how you can help steer the direction of this movement and join our monthly meetup. Once again, that is seniorrehabproject.com/join. Hit me.
Welcome to the Senior Rehab Podcast.
The podcast for rehab clinicians that want to better serve older adults.
And now, your host, Dustin Jones.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Senior Rehab Podcast. Thank you for graciously giving me your time today. I am excited for you to meet today's guest, Shane Haas. Excuse me. He's a graduate of the University of Florida. Shout out to Zach Stearns, but he graduated in the class of 96. He also earned a master's degree in industrial engineering from Texas Tech. In 2002, he currently leads two professional lives, first one being a part-time physical therapist in an inpatient rehab facility, and number two, he is the president of ADL 365 Incorporated, a business he and his wife, who is an OT, started in 2004 for home modifications. As the business grew, he learned basic welding and fabrication skills, which he used 2 years ago to build a prototype of what is now known as the ADL Balance Trainer. In an overall effort to prevent falls, ADLs combine building and selling balance equipment with teaching seminars and continuing to provide home modification services. Man, Shane, that's impressive. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. And it sounds really nice when you repeat it back to me. When you go along the journey, if you've been around as long as I have, you just pick up those things one at a time. But after about 20 years, when you put it all back together in a couple of sentences, it sounds nice. I appreciate you having me on. I appreciate everybody listening. I just hope that my journey, my experiences, what I've been able to put together can be helpful for your listeners. So thanks again. Yeah,
and I know it will be. When I was learning about you, just by reading this paragraph, several things jumped out to me. One is how I imagine amongst your, in your journey throughout your career, I wonder if you had those questions of is this even related to what I'm doing? Or if you're kind of taking these, 180-degree turns or just kind of going in different directions. But now looking at this paragraph, everything seems to fit pretty well. And you're using these, very different skill sets to help people. But then also the other thing that jumps out to me is I just moved from the land of Rogue Fitness, which is a big fitness equipment provider and big into welding and fabrication. And they're almost like the poster child of American manufacturing again. And to hear you create your own, piece of equipment made me think of them as well. So yeah, man, I mean, you're a very interesting guy, but let's start off. Why'd you go to PT school?
Ooh, great question. Went to PT school because I couldn't think of anything else I'd rather do. As a high school kid, of course, into athletics, into fitness. And as I started to look at career opportunities, physical therapy was kind of checked all the boxes that I had. And I can say being out and having been in the clinics. That's one thing that I still enjoy. I love treating patients. And I think as long as facilities will have me and patients will still let me treat them, I'm going to keep treating patients no matter what else we have going on, whether it's building equipment or what other business ventures along the way. Going to keep patient time in my week.
That's important. So when you you graduated in 1996, let's say the first 3 to 4 years out of school, for you, what were some of the most impactful lessons that you learned, or we could even use the word epiphanies, in that first, 3 to 4 years out of school?
I think I was blessed. I came across an individual before I'd even graduated. I was able to go to a seminar that the hospital I was doing my affiliation at let me go to. And to hear this gentleman speak inspired me then and continues to inspire me now. His name's Larry Feeler, and he founded a program called Work Steps. And I had not heard of ergonomics. I had not heard of helping to prevent injuries in industry. And the passion that he had for it was contagious. And that was a pivotal time for me because I'm a student, not confident in my skills, not confident in my ability to talk to somebody that had been out in the field that long. But for whatever reason, after he spoke, I got up and introduced myself to him. We carried on conversation. And long story short, I came out to work for him about a year after I graduated. And that kind of started me on that path towards what ended up being going to engineering school and helped to lead to some of the different things that we got into.
All right. Engineering school.
You never know. You never know that little voice inside of you that says, hey, go talk to that individual. Just listen to it and go.
All right. So you went to engineering school. Your wife, Lee, did you meet her before engineering school or after?
I did before. We had 2 kids when I went through engineering school already.
So how'd that go? That conversation saying, honey, I got this really good physical therapy job. I think I'm going to go back to school.
She was supportive. I got an amazing wife, and she knew when she met me that I was going to do a lot of different things. Maybe she didn't know that was one of the things I was going to do. But very fortunate again, when I went through engineering school, I was supported on a NIOSH grant that financially paid for tuition, books, fees, and gave us a stipend to live on. So I had a good answer in case she said, well, how's all this going to work? I had a plan.
What grant was that? I'm not familiar with that.
NIOSH stands for National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, and there's a select few universities around the country where they have a stipend and a grant and everything set up to support students as they go through their graduate studies.
Okay. Did you have an idea of what you wanted to do with that degree, or did you just know you wanted that skill set that you could potentially create something with afterwards?
I knew that I wanted more in ergonomics than just a weekend class. There's a wide range of skill sets in that field. It's not necessarily standardized, even though there are some efforts to do so. But you can have anything from a weekend certification and pass a test to going to school for 2 years and then having to pass a more nationally accredited exam. So I look at that and go, well, 2 days or 2 years, I mean, they can't be the same thing. And as I looked into it more and more, you start to realize what those differences are. So I went the longer route.
Yeah. So how did you use that once you were on the back end and you had that degree?
It's been a nice combination in the field of ergonomics. If you don't have a healthcare background, you don't understand the people side as much, and you don't understand their injuries and their pain in the recovery process. On the other side, if you're healthcare and you don't have the technical background, you don't understand the analysis side maybe as well, or how to model and how to simulate some things. So that combination together has been pretty nice because you can understand, both sides of the design side as well as the human side. And it really has been a beneficial combination.
Yeah. Are there many PT programs that you can do a dual degree in a shorter period of time?
I don't know of any. Mine certainly wasn't. There were 2 separate degrees. So you just got to like school.
Yeah. That's fascinating. So so you were into ergonomics. When did you really start to work with older adults, the geriatric population?
Well, if you remember, I went to University of Florida. So Florida is a little notorious for retirement community. So probably some of those seeds got planted when I was going through my affiliations in Florida, as well as my first year working in Florida was in Daytona Beach. And that hospital had a lot of older adults in their outpatient center as well as in the hospital. But then when I come back to Lubbock, Texas, we're not notorious for a lot of manufacturing. So there's not just as big opportunities for ergonomics as there would be if I stayed in Dallas or Austin or some of these other bigger cities. So that really got me looking at this niche, which is looking to apply ergonomic principles to the home, for lack of a better segue, where we can apply the same kind of environmental changes to help keep people safe. In the home environment, it just happens to be our senior adults. And the changes that we happen to make aren't quite as sophisticated, but the outcome's the same. You're making people's lives better.
I love that topic. I've had a couple people on the podcast, Chris Hines being one of them. He definitely has that kind of PT view of our environment. He does in the homes, but definitely in our communities. Cole Galloway, he's a professor at Delaware. He was looking how to make homes more mobility friendly for all walks of life. And then Mark Hager as well. He's kind of a guru in the aging in place movement. So you having a very special skill set in that realm, like those other people I mentioned, for an average Joe like me, could you give me kind of some basic principles? When you're going into a house, when you're assessing, a living situation, what are some fundamental principles that you're using, or what are you observing when you go into a place? And I'm selfishly asking that question as a home health PT because I have to do this every day.
Sure. Well, there's a couple of, we don't have to recreate the wheel. There's been a lot of people that have laid the foundation for us, one of them being the ADA. So knowing the ADA guidelines, particularly for the bathroom, that's going to be where grab bars should be placed. That's the most often used. Some of their recommendations on space, whether it's doorway clearance or turning radius for the wheelchairs, those are great things to know. But when you look, and you can look at home modifications from two different lenses. One could be accessibility. So that could be people that are in wheelchair or using a walker. The other is fall prevention. And when you look at it just solely from the sense, and I know those have a lot of overlap, but if you look at it from the sense of fall prevention, you can go back and start at the ending point and work your way from that. The ending point being, what modifications do we make to help people prevent falls? So, for example, you could say grab bars or handrails at the front door if there's stairs. Could be ramps, a shower chair, handheld shower, grab bars near the toilet. Could be the bed, having a bed cane. There, when you start to look at each of the scenarios where people are falling, you can get down to about 8 or 10 different adaptive aids. So then you start to go, if I know my patient's a fall risk, let me look to see if they have these 8 or 10 adaptive aids in place. And if you're in home health, that's a great advantage because you can actually see their home. If you're in a facility and you can't make a home visit and you ask the question, well, do you have a ramp in place? They might say, yes, I do. But that ramp might be more of a danger than what it is a help because it's going to be too steep, or it won't have handrails, or it's going to be made of plywood that's starting to pull up at the edges, or too big of thresholds and these kinds of things. But starting at that vantage point where we can look at it from adaptive aids, great. Or if you're looking at it from what we know in ADA, from a design standpoint, that's great. But we don't often get to go in at the design phase. We're coming in after everything's built and put into place. And sometimes it's really hard to change the physical environment.
Yeah. This is very pertinent to me right now. My wife and I just purchased our first home, and it was built in 1940. It's two beds on the first floor, has a full bath, and then 2 bedrooms up top and a bathroom upstairs. And it's the first home that we've ever purchased. We don't have any kids, and we're working with this contractor. And I'm, with my home health perspective and with the intent of, having my parents, potentially, be with us, towards the end of their life. Sorry, Mom, if you're listening to this. But I have this mindset of, okay, like where, we probably don't want a bathtub. How can we do a walk-in shower but have room for a shower chair? Do we want the rounded doorknobs or the lever doorknobs so it'll be easier for them to open if they have arthritis in the hand or some other issue, and steps and railings and all this stuff. And you would laugh to see this contractor's reaction when I bring up this stuff, and you could see it on his face. He's like, "You're not 85 years old,
Right.
You're 30-year-old, But it is interesting how I'm starting to think about those things. But I'll definitely need to study up though with those resources that you mentioned, because it is helpful to kind of broaden our perspective a little bit, to see what we can do to make people operate safely in the home.
And I look at the home modifications and the adaptive aids. If we relate that back to balance,
Mm-hmm.
that's an aspect of treating patients with balance problems. In particular, if those patients aren't going to have a great prognosis or they're not making improvements, we need to start to look at adaptations to help keep them safe instead of hoping that we're going to be able to change their bodies to help keep them safe.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that can be a hard lesson for a lot of therapists to learn of when do you, I don't want to say throw in the towel, but when do you, come to a realistic perspective that, we need to worry more about the environment than, this person's physical ability. That probably came across as bad, but I know I've felt that before where, I guess if we're looking on the spectrum, I focus so much on improving their physical ability and neglecting, their environment, as, I probably need a more balanced approach when addressing balance and falls.
But with what we know from lit reviews and things like that, exercise is the number one way to help prevent falls. So focusing on the body is a great start, and we all should be focusing on their body, because the improvements we make with their bodies, they get to carry around with them everywhere we go. When we make a specific home adaptation or modification, that's only going to help them at that one spot in that one environment. So, I think we need to go all in on exercise, particularly balance training. And then when we start to see we're not getting the results that we want, now what's our second phase that we're going to bring in there? And that would be the modifications. Yeah,
that's a good point. And I think it's a good segue into your company. So adlbalance.com. I was on your website earlier. Lots of good stuff, lots of good education, and you've got the ADL balance trainer, which I'm sure we'll get into. But I just want to start off this part of the conversation with why ADL balance? Why start a company, with focusing on balance?
It was kind of out of request and out of need. Some of our local agencies asked. They knew I'd helped with some of their modifications for helping their consumers to work and making changes in the workplace. So they asked me, can you help in the house? We're having somebody having a hard time being able to get to work. And when I went to look at that particular house, it was they needed a ramp. And then they asked me, can I design the ramp? And I said, sure. So I did. And they asked me, can you build the ramp? And I said, sure. So that's really where it started. And that was about 10 years ago. And then they asked me to start doing a lot more assessments for homes to try to identify barriers for individuals being able to stay safe in their homes. So from that, started to look around and see, man, there's really a need for somebody to do this work as well. And I grew up in construction. My best friend's dad was a home builder. He put us to work, and just saw an opportunity there and said, well, we can add this service line into our company. And I have no idea how many grab bars we put in, but there's got to be a bunch. And the same for ramps. I mean, now we drive through cities and my kids are looking at ramps going, hey, Dad, is that ramp good?
Is that a good incline?
Right. And I'm like, okay, you're the next generation. I got to get you schooled up, get you taking this over in a little while. but that's where the interest in balance, and then it kind of came to a point where a home health agency asked me to help them develop a fall prevention program. And as part of that, I was fortunate. They paid me to comb through a bunch of articles and make heads or tails of what was out there in terms of recommendations. And as somebody that really likes to learn, that was a wonderful time just to sit back and go through everything and kind of see where we're at as a profession in respect to helping to prevent falls. And that's why I said, the number one thing we can do is exercise. And I strongly believe as our profession, PT, OT's in there as well. I mean, we are well positioned, probably better positioned in the balance specialist area than what we are in a lot of other niche parts of our professions. And that might not even be a niche part anymore. I mean, it's mainstream for a lot of our patients. But we as a profession are the ones that need to be just taking the reins on this and saying, we understand the exercise part of it. We understand the modification side of it. We can put all this together and really be a big benefit for our patients.
So with that statement, if you were to look at the lay of the land, just in your interaction with other therapists and, whether it's with education, consulting, or working, do you feel like we are living up to our potential capacity? Do you feel like we are the experts in balance when we look at the day-to-day occurrence in the rehab facilities and in home health? What's your opinion on that?
I feel like we are in that spot, but we want to do more to really entrench ourselves in this area. We want to learn more. We want to sharpen the saw more. We want to let other professions go, man, if you're having issues with falls, we need to get you for therapy. Not all fall factors are therapy related. So we're not ever going to be the only players in this area. For example, medications. Medications are going to involve pharmacists and doctors, but they are a big factor for falls. But we need to team up with the nurses and doctors in those areas that aren't part of our wheelhouse. But the areas that are in our wheelhouse, we can all get better. I'm constantly still, every year in the wintertime, I go out and I hire a couple of grad students to pull articles for me so I can see what was published in the previous year and continue to sharpen that saw. And it was great because last year they came out with a lit review, and it was the first one that I'd come across that put parameters to balance training, because up to that point, there were some suggestions that you might infer from articles and things like that, but nobody had come together like what we had for strength training and what we had for cardiovascular training. We know how much weight we need to lift, how often we need to lift it to make strength improvements. We know how often we need to get on that treadmill for how long and what percentage of our max predicted heart rate to make improvements in cardiovascular training. But we didn't have that for balance. So this was one of the first out there for balance. So that was nice to see. And just as a kind of a rough summary, if somebody goes, well, hey, what did it say? The idea is we want to be training. We want to train patients for about 15 minutes every time we see them for balance. And then of that 15 minutes, we want to have about 5 different exercises in there. So that would lead you to, about 2 to 3 minutes per exercise, and we can have some rests in there. But the rest breaks don't count towards the training time. So we want to have a variety of exercise. We want to take up at least 15 minutes of our treatment time with balance exercise for the patients that are having balance problems.
So what are some common mistakes that you've noticed or seen in terms of evaluation of patients? And this is, once again, is another selfish question in terms of, when I think of balance training, I mean, so many, so many different things come to mind that I could probably put under that umbrella. But I'm 5 years out of school and I've got so much to learn. But I feel like my pain point is being able to accurately and concisely establish an exercise, routine or intervention that actually addresses their specific issue that is contributing to their balance deficits. So what would you say to someone like me or someone that really struggles with, how do I do a good evaluation really figure out what's going on here with this patient.
Sure. And again, this is another area. There's a lot of standardized assessment tools out there, so we don't have to recreate the wheel. But if you think of balance in a general sense, what affects our balance? The position of our feet is one thing that affects our balance. What we're standing on affects our balance. That could be a hard floor, rocker board, foam. What we're doing with our body affects our balance, and that could include what we're doing with our head, what we're doing with our arms, what we're doing with our trunk. So we know these different tasks or these different postures or these different stances affect our balance. So we want to be able to look at these different things. But then we know from a basic system standpoint that our eyes, our inner ears, and the touch sense that we get from our feet are the way that the brain receives information for balancing. And then what does the brain do with it? And then how does it get it back out in motor responses? So we need to just back up for a second and say, okay, what is this balance? How do these balance systems all play together? Make sure that we're looking at each of those areas. What happens when we close our eyes? What happens when we move our head? What happens when we compromise the touch sense from the feet? And that could go back to what we're standing on, those kinds of things. How well is the brain organizing these thoughts? And then how effectively is that person using those in different motor strategies? So your question was, how can I assess patients more concisely? And I would say, depending on the setting that you're in, you're going to fall in like whether it's Tonetti or Berg or timed up and go. You're going to find one of these that works better for your set of or for your patient population. It can go either. It extends now. I mean, we're getting very technical in our outpatient centers and in our rehab centers where we have force plates, and we're getting confidence of 95% confidence intervals of where their balance points are at during their sway testing and these kinds of things. But ultimately, you take that intake, you use it to see where did we get the lowest scores, and wherever we got the lowest scores, those are their problem areas. But we never shut off our lid. I mean, we're watching them as we're going through these tests, and we can see things that aren't recorded on some of the checklists or some of the surveys or some of the assessments. And that's where I love the fact that balance is not just so cut and dry that we could train a technician to do it like what we can do for some other areas.
Right.
Balance, in my opinion, and this is my opinion, balance should always be in the domain of a skilled intervention, and it should be carried out by a trained professional, PT, OT, PTA, CODA. I mean, you should be able to look at all these different variables that are going on and say, how do I want to change? What do I want to change? How do I want to change it? So I know that I'm continuing to challenge my patients in a healthy way.
I like that. Yeah, because it's so easy. I'm just thinking in my experience and in home health, it's easy to do, a Berg or, do a Tonetti, and just take that test and make assumptions based off of it. And then just kind of pick and choose, out of your bucket of balance exercises that you were exposed to in your clinical settings or, when you came out of school, and just, cross your fingers and hope, that Berg or Tonetti gets better when you discharge, and just think of how we're just guessing. It's a guessing game instead of, there are ways that we can be very precise in our evaluations, and the better that we can evaluate, the better, we're going to treat.
Let's take one point on that and just say, when a patient loses their balance during that assessment test, so say if it's the Berg and they're stooping forward to get something off the ground, and then we look and see, okay, they lost their balance, but now how are they recovering their balance? Right. Or if it's the turning and they're turning to look over one shoulder or the other, now we can see when we lose our balance, we go back to the balance strategies: ankle, hip, reaching, grabbing, arms, stepping, knee, all these different things. But when we think of particularly our older populations, they skip. They go from ankle strategy to reaching and grabbing and arms. They skip over hip. Right. The knee strategy, we really don't use that much unless you're on a boat or something, you play linebacker, you're lowering your center of gravity when you use that knee strategy. We don't use that a lot in life unless there's maybe a perturbation, but that's one that's kind of got this special area that it's important for. But just normal daily life, we got ankle strategies, the first line of defense. And then it should come to hip strategy as second line of defense. And then we go to reaching and arm strategy kind of things for the next line of defense. And a lot of times that goes together with the hips. Mm-hmm. But what we see, and maybe it's going to depend on your setting. What I see is patients are losing their hip strategies, whether it be they're too stiff and they can't get into extension. They don't have the strength around the hips. They don't have the coordination. It's not even something they're recruiting any longer because they've been on walkers or they've just been furniture surfing for too long, and the hip strategy has just kind of lost its role. So that's one area I think as therapists we can sink our therapeutic teeth into and say, okay, I know we can make a difference. If I can give them back that hip strategy, now I'm doing something for them.
Yeah. And that's become more apparent to me in the lack of hip strategy, but then also the lack of ankle dorsiflexion to even perform an ankle strategy, just how often, what I see in my patients is, as those present simultaneously. But you can improve upon them. And that's what is a beautiful thing about the human body, but then also our field is that we can break, that very complex phenomenon of us being upright human beings and break down the components of that and train, the reactions that we do have to ultimately, be better with balance. So let's move on to, we'll bring the industrial engineering degree back into things. So you have this company, adlbalance.com, and you welded and fabricated your own piece of equipment. Tell us about the ADL Balance Trainer.
I think that's what happens when you give a therapist a welding machine. We just start to build stuff. It's not out of like Coban and tape and PVC pipe anymore. You can step it up a notch. But okay, so here's the backstory on the balance trainer. Reaching is a big part of ADLs. And for example, in the kitchen, we reach up, we reach down, trying to retrieve items that we need to cook, or we're putting things away after they're clean. You could shower, getting dressed. I mean, we're reaching all the time. But when I stepped back and looked at how often am I training reaching in my balance treatments, and I said, I'm not training reaching all that much. And when I do, it's kind of like this secondary role, this kind of, well, I know I have some cones, so we're going to set some cones in my hand and I'll stretch my hand out. And if you can make it there, I'm going to stretch it out a little bit further. But then I'm holding cones and I don't have my hands free from my patients. So that's where every entrepreneur, every inventor says, oh, I had that light bulb moment. That was my light bulb moment. So, and I remember I was watching Shark Tank with my girls, and they're saying, what would you do for a business idea? So I sketched out the first balance trainer, and I said, that's what I would do. And of course, they didn't know, what went into therapy and what was into balance and all that kind of a thing. So they just kind of brushed it off. But then I built it. I went out into the shop and built it. I had help. One of my employees is a machinist, and I've been very fortunate to have him involved along the way. So I can't say that I'm a master fabricator because I'm not. He can pick up where I can't. And but anyway, he helped me make sure everything was straight. And I wasn't going to be too embarrassed when I brought it in for what I call my therapy buddies to try out at the rehab hospital.
Yeah, while they're drinking beers.
I hope not, because it was during work hours.
All right.
So that's a different balance problem altogether. But so there it is. I mean, you bring the first one in, and it's just kind of rough because that's just how you build stuff the first time. But it was good enough to where they could get the idea of what I was trying to do. And I know we don't have the advantage of having video on this, but basically the balance trainer, it's a structure that goes around a patient, and it allows platforms to adjust up and down, so you can make them high and you can make them low, and you can also scoot other platforms forward and back. So you have this reaching envelope all the way around the patient, and you can make small adjustments to those platforms. They just have little jam bolts, and you just loose it a little bit, slide it up. And if they can reach up and they're not having any unsteadiness, you just make it a little bit higher the next time they have to reach up to that platform. My wife's an OT, like we talked about, so she had input all along the way, and she found ways to make it better. She said, well, what if we had some balance games that they could play? What if the platforms weren't all one color and we made them different colors? And it was nice to have kind of an OT lens along the way, because it turns out OTs like to use it, and even have speech therapists getting in there for some of the cognitive challenges with their patients too. So we've had a lot of fun with it. It's been about 2 years in the running. Learned how to help write a patent application, just different things you never thought you'd get into coming out of therapy school. Never in a million years did I say, I'm going to build a piece of exercise equipment.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be a safe bet to say coming out of school, but look at you now. Yeah, for listeners, excuse me. It reminds me of a squat rack, honestly, like a barbell squat rack that has, adjustable. But everything is adjustable in terms of the height of the platforms, the height of kind of the support bars that run along the side. And it's pretty neat. Looking at this picture, and there's a video on there, and all the links to these products or website are going to be in the show notes for people listening. But everything is adjustable, and you can challenge a patient in so many different facets, which is very intriguing. I'm wondering, could you build me kind of a hook? So I could put a barbell across the top of that rack and make it a little squat rack. Could we do that?
That might be it. Now the frame is plenty sturdy, but we have had requests to build different kind of add-on pieces to it. So I'll put that in the list of the build add-on pieces, and we'll see what comes out. You just never know.
All right. And that's not the only thing that you're making. Tell us what else you got on there.
We have a rumble board, and then we have the hip stick. Now the every product, I try to answer or solve a problem with it. And the problem I was having with a lot of the tilt boards and balance boards that we were using in the clinics is that we're taking these products from fitness primarily, and our patients, they're not ready for fitness necessarily. We're trying to get them ready for fitness, but the problem was we'd get them on these boards, and they couldn't stand on them. They would lose their balance immediately, and that's a blow to their confidence. And so I said, well, this isn't that hard of a problem to solve. Let's just make the arc underneath the board a little bit less aggressive. And then I also noticed when they stood on or went to initially step on a lot of things, it slid out from underneath their feet if they were on a hard floor. So we just added a little rubber on the bottom. And then as I was visiting with my youngest daughter on this one again, she said, what would be cool, Dad, is if you made the bottom look like a saw blade. So I said, yeah, that would be cool. But what she didn't realize is she planted that seed in my mind, that haptic feedback would be nice if they started to tilt or rock. If they had something, particularly if they have a diminished sensation, they might be tilting and rocking, but they don't know it yet until it's too late and they've lost their balance. But by adding the notching on the bottom of the rumble board, you get a little haptic feedback as it tilts forward and back. That's where the name rumble board came from, was like the rumble strip on the side of the highway. You get that little haptic feedback that, hey, things are moving here.
Yeah.
So that's the rumble board. The last one that we have out right now is called the hip stick. And it's just to help us. The problem is we didn't have a lot to really make patients have to use their hip strategies to stay balanced. I know we have to use it some on foam and we have to use it some on rocker boards, but the hip stick really kind of cut to the center of this issue. You stand on it to where the toes are hanging off one side, the heels are off the other side. So it kind of cancels out or puts the ankle strategy at a disadvantage. And with our help in that, we kind of cue the patients. Now, the key to staying steady on this thing is to use your hips. If you start to sway backwards, poke your hips forward. If you start to sway forwards, poke your hips back. And it's just a real simple product, but we didn't have anything out there besides stacking some 2x4s together to do that, which is fine. But my mom went through rehab, and she pointed out to me how janky some of the things we have in our clinics can be. She said, I can make all that stuff at home. And she was right. She could, because we all made it at home too. So we tried to make each of these products with a professional look to them. So that way, when you have them in your clinics, the patients will go, oh, I guess I can't make that one at home.
Yeah.
There you go. And we got a couple other things that we got in the works, and variations on the balance trainer that we're kind of excited about, but we're not going to, we can't put them out there just yet. But in the next year or so, we'll have some new neat balance products out there too.
Yeah. And I do like these products because you definitely have scaled some of the pieces of equipment that we will see in our rehab facilities that, probably have their origin in the fitness realm. And, they're, for a lot of people, they're not necessarily appropriate, for a lot of the patients that we're treating. So yeah, that's really nice that you were cognizant of that. And I really love the point that you brought up in terms of the confidence and the self-efficacy, and just how defeating it can be for someone to hop on, whichever piece of equipment that we have them use, whether, it's something as simple as a foam pad or, something like the blue, wobble boards of, their inability to perform the tasks that you want them to perform. A lot of people, that's a ding against their confidence, and can really, ultimately, hurt outcomes if they don't continue to work hard to improve. So yeah, kudos to you for being aware of that.
Well, we're walking that fine line between challenging them and frustrating them. So when I'm teaching out there, we call it the 50-90 rule. We want them to be steady at least 50% of the time, but we don't want them to be steady more than 90% of the time. So just kind of, that gives you this zone, if you will, of training intensity. So that way we make sure we're not undertraining, because we're not going to get the outcomes we want. And like you just said, if we frustrate them, they're not going to be plugged in, they're not going to buy in, and then we're not going to get the outcomes we want either. So we really want to try to find that sweet spot of training intensity.
I like that 50-90 rule. Okay, well, let's transition a little bit. I want to be respectful of your time. I'm just going to ask some quick questions. Don't worry about, quick responses by any means. So first one, what were you doing when you were 25 years old? Give me some context here.
25. I graduated therapy school at 22. 3 years out, I was working in Odessa, Texas, at an outpatient for that gentleman I told you about. That was at that I met at that seminar. And great opportunity there, great clinic. I met my wife there, so great souvenirs too.
So if you could go back to Odessa and talk to that 25-year-old Shane Haas, what would you tell him? What advice would you give him?
It's advice somebody gave me, particularly when I went to grad school and I stopped being active in the clinics. Somebody way smarter than I'll ever be told me, don't ever forget who you are and where you came from. And what he was trying to say is, don't forget that you're PT. We all got into therapy because we have a heart for patients. On some level, we're vested in our patients. We care about letting them have a better life, whether that means better performance in sports or being able to go travel and see their kids. So even though we can get involved in a lot of other fun aspects of our field, don't ever forget why you got into this profession in the first place.
Yeah, that's good advice. Well, so if, let's say, in that inpatient rehab facility where you're working part-time now, and you can use, the equipment that you make. I know it'll be a biased answer, but just try and answer this honestly. What are some of the most helpful tools or resources that you use on a day-to-day basis in the clinic?
Helpful tools will lump into like equipment. So helpful equipment.
Yeah, you can use equipment. Some people have even referenced apps for their iPad or iPhone or whatever. Anything that you use on a day-to-day basis that helps you better serve your patients.
And I'm trying not to be a total homer on this answer. I have thoroughly enjoyed being able to use some of the balance things on patients, and I'm not gonna just go on a big old infomercial on that. Just know that part of my passion is continuing to treat patients, and part of my joy is being able to see the problems answered in a way that not only I use, but you see other therapists use, and not only at the rehab hospital that I'm at, but you see it go into different spots, and other therapists are like, yeah, this is working for me too. But coming back to it, man, it really comes down to a couple of things. And it's not going to be apps and equipment and all this kind of stuff. We need those things. We need our overhead harnesses. We need our parallel bars. We need our mat tables. But we need our clinical skill set to identify why this person is having the problem that they're having. And you mentioned that dorsiflexion. So that could interrupt their ankle strategy. But then you could say, okay, well, what is it? Is it weakness? Is it stiffness? That's what drives as you get in this field. And I don't know if people that have been at it as long as me, if all of us feel the same way, but that's what we end up settling into and getting our comfort and our confidence from is the fact that we can identify those problem spots with patients. And a lot of times, we give the interventions and treatments that we've been trained to do. It's not because we're, doing anything special. We're just doing the stuff that we've learned how to do. And we've seen it more and more and more times. So it lets us cut to the chase a little bit quicker.
Yeah. And I'm definitely guilty of that. And it's becoming more and more aware to me of just the power of our brains and clinical reasoning and a thorough evaluation that actually gets to the bottom of people's issues and not making assumptions on what is contributing to their problems that they may have.
And the evaluation doesn't stop on that first visit. I mean, it's continuous. Every time you're working with them, you're looking and watching and seeing what's happening. So it's like continuous improvement in engineering. I mean, we have continuous improvement going on with our patients each time we see them too.
I like that. Who is someone in the PT world that we should know more about?
Wow. Somebody in the PT world we should know more about. These folks probably have had more of an influence on me, and they're not going to be in the sense that they're balance gurus or people that have made equipment before. But the first one is the guy I met at the seminar, Larry Feeler, that started Work Steps. He showed me what having an entrepreneurial spirit and a physical therapy degree can do for you. He was amazing and continues to be amazingly successful. He's in every state in the country with his program and has helped untold numbers of people not only get put in the jobs that they should be in, but kept ones that weren't ready to do some of the work they wanted to do, kept them from being in harm's way. So just a lot of respect to him and a lot of appreciation for what he did for me when I was very young. When I first started, I was on faculty for a little while at Texas Tech while I was going through grad school and had the great fortune to be coming on the same time as Chad Cook was coming in. So I got to work with him early on a day-to-day basis and just kind of see the way his mind worked. And he loved research and had a passion for wanting to better understand problems in manual therapy and how to teach and quantify these things more. And he's been very, very successful. He gave one of the biggest speeches at CSM this year down in San Antonio. He's up at Duke. And just to see what he can accomplish, having that same passion, but in a different area. So I guess the common thread in both of those is what gets you excited about the field of physical therapy, and then start to align yourself and gather skills and gather experiences in those areas. And for me, it's been in the field of balance. So
I like that. So let's say we're at CSM in San Antonio. Well, we should have met. I was down there too. That was a heck of a conference. But let's say we're back.
There's only 12,000 people. I can't believe we didn't see each other.
I know. It was unreal. So let's say we're at CSM and you've got every geriatric rehab clinician in the room and you've got their attention. What would you want them to know?
I would want them to know that they're in a great spot. We got our population of senior adults is gonna double by, I think the latest thing, double by the year 2050. And this is a population that's struggling. They're having problems, in particular with falls and balance issues. So I'd want them to know that I feel like their heart's in a great spot. Their opportunities in therapy are in a great spot. So I want them to know they're appreciated and that, they're going to be in work for a very long time because that area of our field is going to grow and grow and grow. And there's opportunities there that need to be unearthed that we're learning with our senior adults, whether with what what kind of vigor they can tolerate in their treatments, or even in balance. I mean, balance has been one of the least defined areas of our profession for a long time, and that means opportunity. There's opportunity to research and study and collaborate and make our product better and better. Our product being the services we provide to our patients. So,
yeah, great. Well, Shane, I appreciate your time. I really respect what you're doing. I get a decent amount of emails from people, trying to pitch a product or education or service or whatever it is. And when I came across your stuff, it's very clear that you're a clinician. Like you work with patients and you fix problems. And I know the listeners will say that too. After listening to this, it's very clear that you're a problem fixer. And if you see an issue, you're going to do everything you can within, your capability to improve the situation, whether it's, teaching a course or creating a piece of equipment, or modifying a home, just all these different things. It's just really impressive.
You created a podcast. So.
Yeah. But yeah, don't turn the spotlight off of you, sir. But thank you. Yeah. Cause it's very motivating, for people like me, honestly, just to, not, just be complacent with the status quo. But to know that we have a lot of things that we can do to improve the situation, whether it's start a podcast or whether it's, create all kinds of different products, physical products, or, educational products. So yeah, just want to encourage you to keep doing that, because it is very impressive to see. And I know if listeners want to pick your brain, they can go to adlbalance.com. Is there any other places on the interwebs you would want them to check out, or is that a good place to start?
Yeah, that's a great starting point. I mean, like everybody else, we got a Facebook group. We got things I put out on Twitter. I tend to be more seasonal, and we'll do series of videos around a pointed topic than somebody that's just on there continuously every day. But if they're interested and want to learn more about what we got going on, that'd be a great spot to start. You bet.
Yeah, and I'll put all the links to that in the show notes and everything we mentioned. Yeah, great chat. Shane, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Dustin, thank you. Appreciate you.
Hit me. Thank you for listening to the Senior Rehab Podcast. I appreciate your time. And if you enjoyed this episode, do me one favor. Share it with one other person that would benefit. Thank you. If you want to see the show notes or find more episodes, just go to seniorrehabproject.com. And until next time, my friends, do not forget to stay funky. The Senior Rehab Podcast is sponsored by Great Seminars and Books. If you need high-quality geriatric con ed that's worth your time and money, check out Great. Owned by the living legend Carol Lewis, Great offers courses and products created by recognized leaders in geriatrics. Learn the most effective techniques for diagnosing and treating your patients. Just go to seniorrehabproject.com/great and get $25 off by using the code SRP25. The show is also sponsored by you, the listener. Go to seniorrehabproject.com/join to find out how you can help steer the direction of this movement and join our monthly meetup. Once again, that is seniorrehabproject.com/join.